Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we are plunging into a text that really gave intellectual fuel to revolutions, defined modern democracy, and it still challenges our most basic assumptions about authority.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract.
Exactly. And he kicks it off with one of philosophy's most potent declarations. Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains.
And that one sentence is really the core tension driving the whole work. I mean, Rousseau wasn't just observing the world, he was embarking on this massive philosophical project.
A mission, really.
A mission, yeah. As he defines it, it's to see if a truly trustworthy and just rule of administration can be found in the social order.
And it's a mission aimed at solving a fundamental paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we reconcile justice with utility? How do you get what right approves to line up with what interest dictates?
Precisely. He's looking for a social order that works for us, but is also, morally sound. And we should remember this text is just an excerpt. It's from a much larger, unfinished project.
But he felt this was the most essential piece to share.
The most essential, yeah. It's also, I find it fascinating that he justifies his own voice in the debate by saying he writes about politics because he isn't a king or a legislator.
He's just a citizen.
He's just a citizen born in a free state, which to him gives him the necessary distance to see things clearly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If we start with the premise that humans are free by nature, what authority could possibly legitimize those chains of servitude?
Well, Rousseau starts by just systematically tearing down every argument for illegitimate rule.
And where does he start?
He begins with force. The idea that right. Rousseau argues that force is purely physical. If I yield to a greater force, that's an act of necessity.
Or just prudence?
Or prudence, right. It's never an act of moral will or duty. Force does not, and it cannot, create right.
So a government that just maintains power through its army, its police, that power is inherently unstable.
Exactly. The moment a greater force comes along, the supposed right of the old power just vanishes. Since force is fleeting, all legitimate authority among men must be founded on something else.
On convention.
On convention, on mutual contracts and agreement.
This sets him up to tackle the arguments from thinkers like Hobbes and Grotius, who suggested that a nation could basically transfer its liberty to a king.
Like selling itself into slavery.
Right, like a person selling himself to a master for subsistence.
And Rousseau just rips that analogy apart. He points out it fails immediately because a king doesn't provide subsistence. He extracts it from his subjects.
It's the opposite. The slave gets security and food, but the nation gives up its goods and often just gets war and misery from the king's ambition.
But the real philosophical knockout blow is what we've been calling the insanity clause.
Right.
That's the core moral argument. Rousseau says relinquishing your liberties, relinquishing your humanity, your rights, your duties, it removes all morality from your actions.
And he says any contract that demands absolute authority on one side and unlimited obedience on the other is just empty. It's void.
It has to be void because a contract needs mutual obligation, right?
Of course.
If I give you everything, including my will, we're not on equal terms anymore. If a ruler can demand anything from me without any guarantee in return, it's a contradiction. You can't contract to have no will. It's insane.
So if nature, brute force, and slavery contracts don't work, we're left with convention. And that takes us right into the social contract itself.
Right. The transition happens because eventually, in the natural state, the individual faces threats, disasters, conflicts that they just can't overcome alone.
So you have to change your mode of existence or you perish.
You have to. And this forces the creation of a collective. And Rousseau frames the contract's core problem, this is the aha moment, as finding a form of association.
That protects everyone with the common strength.
Yes, but ensures that each person, by uniting with everyone else, still only obeys himself and remains as free as before.
And the only way to do that, which sounds completely counterintuitive, is through total commitment.
Total commitment. The key is the complete alienation, the giving up of all your rights by every single member to the whole community.
Total alienation sounds terrifying. Why total?
Because if even one right were kept by an individual, there'd be no common judge to settle disputes between that person and the community. But if the condition is total and equal for everyone,
then no one has an interest in making it unfair to others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you'd just be making it unfair for yourself. Total alienation guarantees absolute equality right at the start.
And this act, this moment of total commitment, creates the republic, the collective body. And that body is the sovereign.
And the will of this body is the general will. This is where we have to draw a really vital philosophical line. Rousseau argues the general will is always right and always tends toward public utility.
But you have to distinguish it from the will of all.
Yes.
So the will of all sounds like simple democracy, right? Just add up all the votes. What's the difference?
The will of all is just the sum of private particular wills. If everyone votes for a tax break that only helps their own specific business, that's the will of all.
Okay.
But if everyone votes on, say, building a public bridge that objectively helps the entire community, that's the general will. The general will only considers the common interest.
So you sort of cancel out the pluses and minuses of all the private interests, and what's left, that shared ground.
Yeah.
That's the general will.
That's it. And it's inalienable and indivisible. The indivisibility is key. Rousseau fiercely attacks earlier thinkers for trying to divide the sovereign into parts legislative, executive, tax rights.
He says it's like trying to make a man out of just eyes or arms.
Exactly. You can divide the functions of government, but the will itself must be a unified whole, always pointing to the common good.
Okay, this unity brings us to the phrase that has caused the most discomfort over the centuries. Being forced to be free. I mean, how can a body force me to be free? That just sounds like tyranny with extra steps.
It is the natural reaction, and it shows how radical Rousseau's definition of freedom really is. When you enter the contract, you agree to the general will.
Right.
So if your private individual suddenly clashes with it, say you refuse to pay taxes for a public road everyone agreed on, you're breaking the pact. You're putting your selfish interest above the common good you consented to.
So forcing me to follow the general will is really just compelling me to obey the law that I, as a citizen, prescribed for myself when I joined.
Precisely. For Rousseau, this compulsion is what secures you against personal dependencies. If you were only ruled by your fleeting private desires, you'd be a slave to your passions.
So true freedom isn't doing whatever you want.
No. True freedom is obedience to the law we prescribe for ourselves. The collective body is just making sure you're being a moral agent and a full citizen.
That completely reframes liberty. Okay, so moving on. When we trade this natural liberty for social liberty, what else do we trade? What about property?
We trade mere possession, which is just based on force, I got here first, for true ownership, which is a real right based on a title guaranteed by the community.
That's a huge shift. But he says the state, through the contract, becomes the master of all its members' goods. That sounds like the state can just take my stuff.
It does, in principle. But paradoxically, that actually makes your personal ownership stronger. When the state guarantees your ownership, it transforms your claim into a legitimate right. It's not just your strength defending it anymore, but the collective strength of the sovereign.
And the property has to meet his three conditions. The land is uninhabited. You only take what you need for subsistence, and you secure it by labor, not just planting a flag.
Correct. Working the land is what makes the right legitimate. But now we have the sovereign body, we have property rights. How does this thing get moving?
It needs legislation, which brings us to the almost impossible figure of the legislator.
The state gets its life from the contract, but it needs movement and will from legislation. And the legislator is this crucial, almost contradictory figure. He's the engineer who invents the machine of the state.
While the ruler is just the worker who operates it.
Right. And this engineer has to possess this extraordinary intelligence, understand human nature completely, yet be totally untouched by human passions.
That sounds less like a politician and more like a god stepping into the world.
That is Rousseau's exact dilemma. The people who need the laws aren't morally or intellectually developed enough yet to accept laws based on pure reason, especially laws that require long-term benefit.
So cold, hard reason isn't going to persuade the masses. What's the workaround?
Since the legislator lacks force and clear reason won't work on everyone, they have to appeal to a nonviolent authority.
They have to claim divine inspiration.
Exactly. By appealing to God, they can get the new population to obey a law whose purpose they don't fully grasp yet. Rousseau points to figures like Lycurgus, Moses, and Muhammad, whose enduring laws prove the powerful minds behind them.
It's the ultimate political cheat code. Borrow divine authority until the people are moral enough to legislate for themselves. That's a profound thought about myth-making in politics.
It really is. It connects the abstract contract back to the messiness of actual human history.
Let's move to the execution phase. Rousseau is very clear about separating the legislative power, the sovereign, the general will, from the executive power, which is the government.
And for him, the government is just a minister or a commission. This separation is absolute. The government's only job is to apply the law to specific cases. It's an intermediary.
Which leads to his rule of proportion, which sounds a bit mathematical.
It is. The idea is that as the state gets bigger, the government needs more force to keep all those citizens unified. But paradoxically, to get more concentrated force, the government itself, the number of magistrates, must be smaller.
A smaller body acts with more speed and power.
Right. And based on this proportion, we get the three main forms of government. First, democracy.
Which he's not a huge fan of.
Not really. He thinks it's only for very small states, and it requires almost superhuman virtue. He says it's unnatural for the majority to govern and the minority to be governed. A true democracy, he argues, has never existed and never will.
Okay, second is aristocracy. The executive power is in the hands of a minority.
Best for medium-sized states. And Rousseau really champions the elective aristocracy, where you elect the most knowledgeable and wise people to govern. That, for him, is the best system.
And finally, monarchy. Kingship.
Right. Executive power in a single person. Thus, for large states, it's the most energetic form, but also the most dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because the private will of the monarch can so easily dominate the general will. It's powerful, but it's unstable, and Rousseau saw corruption as just inevitable, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. The government is always trying to narrow itself. Democracy slides into aristocracy, aristocracy into monarchy. And when the government, the minister, usurps the legislative power of the sovereign.
The social contract is broken. At that moment, citizens legally go back to their natural freedom, even if they're still forced to obey the usurper.
It's a clear point of failure.
Yeah.
But if you're a citizen and you're trying to figure out if your government is good or bad, what's the one metric Rousseau gives you?
It's not about how free you feel or how quiet the streets are. The surest sign a state is well governed is its population growth.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
The government under which citizens multiply is the best. The one under which they decrease is the worst. It's a purely material, measurable sign of vitality.
That's a crucial takeaway. Look at the numbers. Look at the families. So to recap, we've got the general will, the total alienation for equality, and the absolute line between the sovereign and the government.
And to leave you with a final provocative thought, Rousseau knew that a state's longevity wasn't just about political structure, it's also about loyalty, which often comes down to religion.
He was worried about what he called the third type of religion, right? The one that gives people two countries.
Precisely. It gives men two codes of law, two leaders, two homelands. This creates an endless, devastating conflict over who to obey, the king or the priest. It makes unified loyalty to the civic body impossible.
If you think service to the state in this life is secondary to rewards in the next.
You become a weak subject. And this echoes Hobbes, who saw that the priest's interest is often stronger than the state's.
Which suggests that a society's stability might depend not just on its laws, but on foundational beliefs that demand undivided loyalty. You can't serve two masters if you want the state to endure. That's a challenge governments are still wrestling with, and a fascinating place to end our deep dive.